must say today's session has been excellent because some new ideas have come in, and since I had also attended the Tripura session, I'm aware of the discussions, and this is a development on the last discussion, definitely is. Being a consultant and involved in business, my inclination towards economic side is always higher, and that's where it moves forward. But I also read history, and from history I've realized that what happens is normally there's an idea, and after the idea there's suspicion. That's always when there are two parties dealing, there's an idea and then there's suspicion, and then you find points of mutual agreement, and then you move towards trust, and then starts the economic movement. This is a natural thing. If you read any history of any area, you will see countries always behaving in this particular manner, as do human beings. I think we are on that third cusp. We are sitting between, on this particular dialogue, we are sitting on mutual agreement and moving towards trust. So I think the positive direction is very visible. I also want to highlight a thing before I ask my fellow panelists, because actually the knowledge sits on either side of me. The one in the center is not with the knowledge but with philosophy. But just coming on to the point, there was a study done by McKinsey which highlighted the fact that we are in Asia, specifically India, because I read India part more seriously, we are moving away from buying base commodities, which was virtually 70% of the wallet size. So most of our money we earned used to go into basic living. Today's date, that is shrunk to 26%, which means our ability to buy more than just the basics has increased. And this is a phenomena which China is much ahead than any other Asian country. Japan has been ahead much before anybody. But India, Bangladesh, other countries are increasing in that side. The corollary of this is, and this is another study by Brooklyn, the corollary is that in 2030, 56 or about 60% of Earth population in middle class terms and the buying power will lie in Asia. So you see this region is very important, and the sooner we all decide to integrate together, we'll really understand why the European Union was formed. Unions are not formed just for fun and pleasure, there's economic reasons also. So therefore I think this dialogue is very good. At the cost of being repetitive and what His Excellency Suzuki-san has spoken, and I will repeat what I love. I love this part about the Kishida-san speech. Industrial value chain is a key component towards building a single economic zone between northeastern region of India, Bangladesh and other regions around. Now if you take this as the building block, if you use this as a building, and we added just now industrial and investment to the whole thing, then how do we take it forward? There are two components which arise from building our economic block. One is people to people connectivity. It's a very powerful source. I mean, this room itself is exhibiting the power of people to people connectivity. The thoughts we had in Asian Confluence earlier and where we are heading and where we have led it towards shows the power of people to people influence. And I think that's what is very important. Another example, India and UK relationships. If you look at it, a colony power should be the last of our friends. When we get rid of somebody like that, we would never move. But if you see the living bridge, which is what UK talks about, today's date the investments from India to UK far exceed from UK to India. It's the other way around. Given Brexit and UK not being part of the Brexit, logically, by any form of logic, and we do maximum business with Europe, there should be very little investments going to UK. People to people connectivity helps, and that's what I think we should be also talking about, and I'm glad we spoke about it. In closing, because we must keep it short so that the knowledge really starts talking, but I think if I had to give an idea, because there are business people, I do see Horikoshi-san here, I also see Suzuki-san from Jetro here, people who influence businesses. If picking up on the idea which Suzuki-san has said, and even His Excellency Mr. Rahman had been talking about, if we can pick up a simple thing, you know, in business we have something called an anchor client. You are setting up a large industrial unit, you get an anchor client and the rest follow. You're selling a building apartments, you get a big anchor client. That's why you have these big film stars whose name is published. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan has bought into this flat. It's given free of cost. Rest sell within a days or couple of days. What we need is an anchor client for this idea. If there is a possibility of an Indian-Japanese joint venture to find products or agro or horticulture or something identified from the northeast region, which is moved out by using one of the ports of Bangladesh, that would be a test, a prototype of the entire thing. So actually, Horikoshi-san, indirectly to you as a chair of the JCC, I speak to you. That would be a fantastic way to get the bird off the ground. So that would be my thought process, which I leave to all these intellectuals here. But if I may pull you in, Riva, now, because you've been hearing all of us and some boring consultants too. What would be your views? Because I know you're very strong on this connectivity and you spend a lot of time on this area. Let's have your views on this now.
Thank you, Ajay, and thanks to Professor Raja Mohan for giving us this big picture. We've actually seen the very broad, bigger picture since morning, and I think what you mentioned, Raja, that the sense of optimism that really comes from political will, and at the core of that is India-Bangladesh relations, which has seen such a tremendous transformation. And also the ability of the leadership to actually squarely address certain difficult issues. And I always repeatedly mention the land boundary agreement in this regard. That really sets the benchmark of how difficult can a question be which can be resolved given the political will. Besides that, Bangladesh's own role in removing anti-India insurgents from the region, this really sets the stage for talking about connectivity. And you're absolutely right that 15-20 years back you could not even talk about things like transit connectivity without getting a backlash. And today I think nobody really, connectivity is taken as a given, and in the entire subcontinent there is a hope that this will lead to greater sub-regional cooperation. And here things like BBIM, the MVA motor vehicles agreement and all can play a very important role. And as Smita Pant mentioned that the facilitations that are the use of Indian territory by Nepal, Bhutan, we know it's happening in the energy sector already. This is very important. So without going into the larger thing, I would like to say that this report is of course absolutely excellent. I think Sabya and Professor, they have done a great job, and going and seeing is believing, and there are lots of recommendations here. And we just heard that Joint Secretary in MEA said that she welcomes these recommendations. I think it's very important that policy makers look at these recommendations. A couple of recommendations I think are very easy to do and should be done quickly, which is an ambassador mentioned about it, the synergies. Because businesses, for them to take advantage of all this connectivity, the connectivity projects are an enabler for business finally to take the hard decision on financing, on whether they want to invest in a particular sector or not. So I think a lot more dialogue needs to take place with the stakeholders. And main thing in that is the business community. I was very glad to know from you that business delegation will be going to Bangladesh from India, and I think that's what we require. Also in the bordering areas like the proximity of Sylhet to Meghalaya, for instance, the business from both sides could really have a lot of dialogue, and it's not really expensive, it's so easy to travel. But that enabling environment governments can create, but the actual activity has to be undertaken by businesses. So the various recommendations that this report makes on stakeholder dialogue, on creation of forums between and among stakeholders, I think is of great importance. The other thing which is, I think, in the report, which is very, very important, is harmonization of various standards, procedures, and LPA chairman is here with us. You know how, there is, each land port is very different from the other, And in some places you will have fiber optic, and some place you won't have. Some place immigration is 200 meters from where you enter. Simple things like ambulance transfer of critical patients. Think out of the box and come up with solutions for these things. I think that's very important. I'd also would like to mention that the Padma Bridge, and especially the rail connection on Padma Bridge, can be a game changer in terms of movement of our goods in Bangladesh. So a study of how this can impact what goods, and the use of the various land ports. Benapole Petropole may lose some of its importance, but today Benapole Petropole is the main point because all items are allowed to be from Indian side exported to Bangladesh. So need to deal with border restrictions which exist, a study of the Padma Bridge, and also you know excuse me, I was in Bangladesh during COVID period, and we just could not come up with a protocol for dealing with movement of trucks crossing the border, and it was such a big problem for months. I mean, there was a pile up. It started with 2,500 trucks in Benapole Petropole, and it just kept, there was no way we could solve that problem. So many drafts were exchanged that this is the protocol. So while one doesn't wish that COVID would come, but we should always be ready. I think at the ground level, coming up with a protocol to deal with a situation like that should be done. And COVID became an opportunity in terms of usage of railway, because in the railway there was one driver who went in, left the train and came back. So the customs and all, everything is done on either side. And we saw 200% increase in rail traffic after that, and all kinds of goods were used in railways, from onions to chilies, which were never moved. The export of onions and chilies was never done through railways. So railways should be given a serious chance, because now I believe in September 2 more rail connections are going to be inaugurated. The Khulna Mongla, which is being done under the LOC project of India, and the Akhoda Agartala, which is a grant project. And these are all very, very important connectivity projects. And once the Shahbazpur Kalora Mahisasan connection comes up, this means that there will be a train connection from Sylhet to Assam. So just look at the possibilities for businessmen in Northeast. And this and we are talking about the Big B project with Japanese assistance from Matarbadi. This is a huge opportunity for the entire sub-region, and I am sure this report will, these recommendations will help policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Riva. Thank you very much. Very clear thoughts. So, Mr. Mishra, I mean, you are in charge of one of the most important ingredient in this entire value chain we are talking about. And there have been talks about building a dedicated corridor which could move goods across and back from Atarbari and Chattogram. So that's one part. There's also discussion of the ICPs in these areas. And then there's also talk about custom simplifying soft infrastructure, hard infrastructure. So actually everybody is keenly awaiting to hear your thoughts. What do you think about it, and what do you think would be your first focus areas as we move along?
Thank you very much, and a lot of new thoughts came into me while I was listening to our esteemed colleagues and panelists, and the focus, of course, is on the Bay of Bengal region, and the new developments that have been taking place, especially the upcoming deep sea port in Matarbari. And our effort, I mean, the first thing would be, of course, the Sabroom land port and the Ramgarh on the other side, towards which we are working very closely. And Sabroom should be ready in another 3 months' time. So the route will get operationalized very soon. Obviously, as of now, to link up with Chattogram port, but in future to link up with Matarbari also. So this would be the main trunk route which would link the whole of the northeast with this part of Bay of Bengal. And the other aspect which was very clearly outlined by Ambassador Suzuki was the shift of the thought or the terminology from just accessibility to developing a value chain, an industrial value chain. So I'm sure we all appreciate that, and that should be the keyword, because that's where all the stakeholders will get together to push it forward. And I think over the last few years, 3-4 years, most of the northeast states are gearing up to see this kind of change. And I know some of the industrialists from south, they visited the northeast and they were exploring new opportunities. And some of the states, they've already formed these core committees in the administration to support their thoughts in terms of, say, making the land available, in terms of what is the power availability, what is the accessibility, etc. So most of the states in the northeast already, gearing up to it. And I'm sure this coming of the seaport will actually make a lot of difference in terms of availability of raw material, cheaper raw material to northeast, so that industrial production can take off. One of the things which Madam Smita Pant mentioned was the transit agreement, and that's also, we are looking at it very positively, and supporting the logistics and industry partners in taking that forward. So as Mr. Sethi just mentioned, we not only, we obviously build and maintain these land ports, but we also try and look aggressively at the linkages that these land ports form. So recently the Freight Forwarders Association had held their executive meeting in Calcutta I think just 2 weeks back, and they had held it in Calcutta with the focus on northeast, that let's start exploring what can be done more in northeast. And fortunately I also got a chance to interact with them, and everybody is very upbeat on the developments, and these developments are being supported on the ground, I think by a lot of infrastructural development. And as mentioned earlier, that the earlier element of lawlessness or criminality, which used to take advantage of the border, that is come down drastically. So in Tripura, I think it's completely gone. In other states like Meghalaya also, it's more or less vanished. So that's supporting, that's encouraging the people to come and invest in this region. So as far as land port authority is concerned, Sabroom is of course developing. We are also looking at the developments of the Nishchandpur rail connectivity, which is the Akhora-Agartala line. We have done a lot in the past to make things more smooth at Petropol-Binapol, because that's the key link between the two countries, and it used to have a lot of friction, so we have tried to remove a lot of it, and we are still working towards it. So getting all the stakeholders together, and it's a difficult task, because each authority thinks that the authority in itself is running the place. So getting them all together and agreeing to changes, that's something that we are trying to do. So we are working with ADB in the corridors development, looking at new corridors. For example, the Daranga Doki corridor, which crosses Guwahati and Shillong, and an important stretch of it, which is Shillong to Doki, is being JICA is actively investing in that to develop it. So this connectivity between not just Bangladesh and India, but Bhutan and India, that link Bhutan and India and Bangladesh, those are the links that we are looking at in future, so that any development in this region not only benefits just Bangladesh or India, but also extends all the way to Bhutan. And the other link that was visible in the map displayed by Ambassador was the Galefu Dalu link, and coming of this important project that he talked about would help that. so these are the linkages between, say, Bhutan and Bangladesh, which will at which we are looking very actively. The other important soft effort that has happened in the recent past is the access platform created by World Bank, and that has brought all the 4 countries close, and we have held very detailed discussions on synchronizing these developments, so that at times what happens is that one side is ready, the other side of the border is not ready. So that's what we are trying to do, is to synchronize it so that all the 4 partners, at least in this, which are actively cooperating in this region, should be able to synchronize their infrastructure development, so that so suppose 27 Matarbari port is coming up, what are the other things that can simultaneously come up to kind of link with it, so that the development starts immediately, and the repercussion of a new investment is felt immediately in that region. So that is the kind of synchronization I'm talking about. So BLPA and the Bangladesh Land Port Authority and LPAI works very, very closely, and we keep holding continuous discussions to synchronize this kind of a thing. The other thing that we are doing, again with the help of Access Platform, World Bank, is digitizing the processes, and again there is a lot of inhibition between the historical authorities like customs and all to kind of openly share data, but we are trying to be a little more positive and aggressive about it, so that indirectly these flows start happening, and towards that we are trying to set up some kind of a synchronization between all the 4 countries, so that at least the land port authorities, they start sharing data very actively, and the process at the border becomes fast and smooth. So as I said, once we develop a corridor, then anything starting from, say, Bhutan at say Daranga, it can be very easily tracked all the way to Doki, and that will make things much faster and smoother. So these are some of the things which we are working on, and a lot of positivity, as Professor Mohan just said, that a lot of optimism and positivity in Northeast, and hopefully as things become a little quieter towards the eastern side also, the trilateral highway work is also going on very fast. Not just the road, but the rail connectivity work is also is being pushed hard. So that should give a very important gateway to the rest of the partners of BBI, and to connect with Southeast Asia, and the ASEAN countries. So with all these developments, our role is just a small part of it, but we try and do it as diligently as possible, so that, and also involve the other stakeholders, so that everybody is aware of what is happening, and that's the push that we are basically looking at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra. One thing I must say, now I understand why you have been given this position and why you have been asked. I love the words you said. We are looking at it positively, but we are aggressively pushing it. I fully agree, we need to push some things aggressively, and this meeting which you mentioned about this freight forwarders meeting, I think this is a very important thing, because one of the challenges of India has no, unlike many countries, we don't have a demand problem, we have a supply problem, and therefore our freight movement and our logistics movement is something very critical for our country's future growth. So I think this meeting is very important from that perspective across for the northeastern region. Before I open the floor and we take some of you questions, and I know we are heading towards lunch and I'm holding you back, Professor Mohan, you have been hearing all of us, and you have a very clear view given the various positions you have held over the long period of time. You understand Asia's geopolitical issues as much as you understand the way India operates. Out of all these things, if you were to guide us and say, put some focus on 2 or 3 areas, would you be able to pinpoint and help us to pinpoint something?
I would simply say, look, I mean, you have to get the business going, you know. The rest, I think the big ideas on foreign policy have been articulated. I mean, the Japanese have talked about the Indo-Pacific, India's look east, act east. We have actually, you know, the political will to do a lot of things. It's really operationalizing. I think half the problem is really is operationalization and getting the stakeholder, you know, business people to, as you said, I'm quite, you know, the South India people are coming to Northeast to see. I think that's why getting the business to, without the finally, without actually, when we talk about people to people, finally it's about B2B connectivity. If we don't get that moving, that's what is going to create jobs. That's what is going to create conditions for more collaborations. So I think getting the businesses to do, and then the rest of the geopolitics. I mean, I would say, see, India and Japan have never been as close. India and Bangladesh have never been as close. Today we are talking about India, Bangladesh, India, Japan working together in the subcontinent to do new infrastructure projects. So I think there is resources, there are ideas. It's really a question of getting things done and removing a whole range of obstacles. But geopolitics is actually, I don't think it's never as well aligned for us in terms of connectivity, in terms of reintegrating the region. So we're really at a, I mean, I'm not excluding the northwestern part of the subcontinent. The rest of the region is really poised to do a lot more positive things. Even in the last 6 months, you can see what's happened between India and Sri Lanka, what happened between India and Nepal, for example, the Millennium Challenge Corporation loan. So I think there is actually a big moment. The question is, are we capable of seizing that and turning it into full advantage, for not just for Indian people, but also for the people of the subcontinent as a whole.
Fantastic. I think that more or less sums it up. I think geopolitical issues are not the issues which challenge us, but getting people to people and business to business movement, and that would self-solve some of the problems, because businessmen will demand solution of problems. Thank you very much, and I think the panel also articulate some of the things. May I open the floor if somebody would like? We can take 1 or 2 questions, Abhya. I hope you're not too hungry and you will allow some questions. Please, the gentleman here.
I'm Brigadier Bhattacharya. I'm leading the Northeast Regional Union Ministry for CII. This is something which has been created just about a year back, and to focus on the Northeast. Now, tremendous changes have come in the way we are doing things, and today I think all of it was recounted in a very beautiful way, and the role of Japan especially in this has been tremendous. In fact, CII has been working with JICA in a big way to do this. We call this the VLFM program. This is the Visionary Leaders for Manufacturing program, which we have done for the last about 10 years, 5 years. And the next coming 5 years, we are doing 2 more big projects with JICA, and one of them is about getting the startup ecosystem in place, and the second one is bringing up the bamboo economy of the Northeast as something which could help Japan also do replacement of their wood that today's environment needs to conserve. So having said that, there is we also conducted 4 of these B20 meetings in the Northeast. We did it in Assam, not Assam, but we did it in Sikkim, we did it in Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur. Now these were, what if I were to tell you what happened, it is really unprecedented. We had all the, we had G20 countries and the invitee countries to be invited. We took a waiver from the MEA, and the people who actually joined were mostly from ASEAN region. That is what you just alluded to, that people were interested. And the people who came from rest of India were from all over. And we had a problem of cutting down people from 500 registrations to 100 because of problems of hotels, availability of transport. We had to cut down to 100, 150 at best. So from there, we learned certain problems that come up. Very, very correctly, I think someone brought out that there is a higher level policy issue that comes out, but operationalizing it at the lower level, at times there is a disconnect. And towards that, institutions like, or organizations like CII can come in. Now, one of the problems that I wanted to get some clarity about was this thing about the Motor Vehicles Act. Today we have got this thing running in Tripura, we have got other places of crossover also. And everywhere there's a traffic jam worth kilometers. That has got sorted to some extent in Petropol using your e-Suvidha by World Bank that you were talking about. So that is solved. It has not got transcribed to Northeast. That needs to be done. The other thing is about transshipment. A vehicle which goes into the other side has to unload all its stuff, load the whole thing up. Even if you put e-Suvidha, it will come in. But after that, going to Petropol or going to the ports and all, if you got to do that, it's a 3-day process.
Sure.
No one wants to get into it just because of these small issues. Is there something happening to the Motor Vehicles Act? And if what time frame is it going to get solved? That is something which I thought.
Fine. So we'll just Riva, would you like to or?
Yeah, the person who would have replied your question is not here anymore. The Madam Smita must have given you the right answer. My sense is that there is commitment. There are historical lobbies which have some resistance, so a lot of negotiations are happening. So hopefully in near future we will see it happen. But it's just that a lot of convincing needs to be done, because a lot of stakeholders are involved in all the 4 countries whose interests have to be washed, so it will take a little time, but I'm sure it will happen. That's my sense at least.
Thank you very much. I know there's that recommendation, part of our recommendation. The gentleman there, I'll just take the last question and then we must.
Yeah. Thank you so much. The first one is, I think, more of, it's Monish from the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. And it's interesting to be here because, recently LPAI report was on India-Myanmar border connectivity. And the first is, of course, the question about, as we talk about optimism and grand visions, and you see political convergence like the one happening in Manipur. And the point about, how do we pass down, how do we make stakeholders on the ground accept and acknowledge the benefits of economic development, so that, we can create shock absorbers, absorb the shocks that is still going on there. Mr. Mishra did mention that once the things settle down in the east, we can work on the trilateral highway. So the first, of course, is how do we create this acknowledgement and absorption of the economic benefits of such grand visions within the population of the stakeholders, the first thing. The second is a quick question to Professor Raja Mohan. I think when we talk about connectivity projects which are inside India, and we talk about the role of JICA and others, there's more of we have more control, if we may say, on who do we involve and what kind of things we do within our border. But the moment we talk about trans-border connectivity projects, there is an insertion of, if we may say so, connectivity competition. So if we look at the kind of connectivity project that China has developed in Myanmar or in other parts of South Asia, how do we navigate this competition cooperation dynamic the moment we talk about trans-border connectivity projects and not just within our country? Thank you so much.
Why don't you take the second one, then I'll direct the first one.
No, please. I think it requires
Okay, I'll talk about the second one. Look, I don't think there's if you think very macro terms, there is competition. Look, India and Bangladesh have 4,000 kilometers of border. China doesn't have a border with Bangladesh. So I think, look, Bangladesh wants to do something with China in some other direction. That's up to them. But Chinese are not stopping us from improving our connectivity, right? So I don't think there is so there is a competition in third countries maybe. You might be bidding for a project in Sri Lanka. But when it comes to India, Bangladesh, it's the biggest border that we have. It is our policies, both countries, that have held back the connectivity. Because whatever choices we had made, the legacy, path dependence has got us there. But today we're breaking out of that. So I don't think there is a China problem to stop India from managing better trade facilitation, improving its customs procedures, improving the way we manage our border. It's all between us. So China doesn't come into this. So China might want to build a port. Yeah, then they have two choices. They can go to Japan, they can go to China. I think Bangladesh has managed it reasonably well. Eventually it's the Japanese who got this big port that are building, but in Burma the choice have been made differently. So I would say where we can act, let's act. Let's do what we can, do it well, and that itself will produce the demonstration effect that look, this partnership can produce results. And I think that's what we need to do. And I don't think we need to worry too much about, because look, the geography is with India in South Asia.
Exactly.
Tibet might be there, Nepal's border, right? But there's no population in Tibet, because they'll get more people in. That's a different story. But the fact is, the natural flow of economics from the Himalayan Nepal is to the plains of Terai and to UP and Bihar. We've not exploited it. In fact, that is our failure actually. If Sri Lanka is not even, how many kilometers of the Park Strait, if you say China is doing more trade with them, it's shame on us. So something is wrong with us if we are not trading with our neighbors and allowed a distant power to trade. So I think the fault, as I said, dear Brutus, is in ourselves, and I think there's one hell of a lot India can do within South Asia. And countries like Japan and our other partners today are willing to help and deal with the competitive element where it's necessary. But I think the principal task is ours. But how do we rethink, how do we reimagine connectivity? How do we reimagine the subcontinent and where we can make progress? How do we lift all boats in the subcontinent? And it is possible today. India's own rise is making it possible. I think that's where we need to go.
Thank you. Would you like to add to his answer, or over lunch would you like to? So maybe you have a one-to-one. He's a lovely chap. I'm sure he's going to be very happy to discuss. What happens in these forums when we have these, specifically when my Japanese colleagues are there, we Indians try to manipulate the whole discussion around ourselves. So for a change, I would like to close the discussion with a question to a Japanese colleague of mine, and I'm sure they are worried who I'm going to ask, but Horikoshi-san, if I may ask you just one question in closing. I know Sumitomo has interest worldwide, and Sumitomo has major interest in Bangladesh and India. On a very broad basis, how do you look at this northeastern region as an opportunity in the long run for the Sumitomo Group?
Yeah, Ajay, thank you very much for your question. I'm Horikoshi, chairman and CMD of Sumitomo Corporation India. And this year I'm chairman. I'm representing chairman of Japanese Chamber of Commerce and in India. But the question is to Sumitomo, not the whole Japanese companies. But when you're asking about Northeast India, so still Northeast India, we don't have any business currently. Maybe still that is Northeast is I think we have maybe not yet focused in that area. We are separately focused in Bangladesh. We are focused in India. But maybe this kind of discussion and support and connectivity is improved, then for the mid to long term, it could be a big potential. And as many people, Mr. Mohan mentioned, maybe step by step, ground level development and what is a challenge, maybe our company has to do, but then maybe connected to the long-term and future, maybe opportunity. That is, I believe, is my word reply to you correctly? I don't know.
Thank you. No, Horikoshi-san. I've spent enough time, 30 years with Japan. I know the humility. I know you guys are already looking and how much you have done in India. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I will close the questions now because I promised we'll close with a Japanese friend. And thank you everybody for listening to the panel. I'm very grateful to this panel for openly sharing views. Thank you very much.